Hey everyone, welcome to Exercise Check. In this video, we're going to be going over classes and objects. That is found in chapter 4.7 of our book. So let's get at it. Going to 4.7 exercises in our reading, we see we need to work on these exercises inside of that Java Web Dev Exercises project once again. So I'm going to go ahead and open that in IntelliJ right now. And there we go, it's open. Before I do anything, I'm going to go up to exercises, right click, press new, and I'm going to make a new package for chapter 4 exercises, CH4, and press enter. There we go. Going back to our reading, we need to open up the file student.java and add all the necessary getters and setters. So let's go ahead and do that. We need to go back in chapter 4 and find where this code is given to us. So we found this code in 4.5 of our reading here. So we have our public class student, so I'm going to copy all of this. Go back over to my IntelliJ. In chapter 4, I'm going to right click, press new, and then I'm going to create a new class, and I'm going to call it student. There we go. And inside of here, I'm going to paste that code. I see that I accidentally double pasted a class there, so I'm going to take that out, take out that extra closing curly bracket, and I'm going to do a shift tab here in order to bring it back a line. So now it's properly formatted. Going back to our reading, we see we need to add all the necessary getters and setters. So let's go ahead and do that. Going back to IntelliJ, I come down here and it says getters and setters have been omitted. So I need to add those getters and setters back into here. Getters, we know, are to access class variables. Class variables in this class are name, student ID, number of credits, and GPA. Setters are to modify those class variables. So any class variable that we want to modify, we create a setter for it. Getters and setters are typically in pairs. So I'm going to create a pair of getters and setters for each of these class variables. We start out with public. I'm going to do the getter first. So I'm going to return something because it's getting a value. So I'm going to say public string get name. It's not going to take in any parameters. And then I return the class variable, which I call using the this keyword dot name. There we go. We created our first getter. Now we're going to create a setter. Setters do not return anything because they're changing the class variable. So we say void. Then we say set name. We need to take in what that name is going to be changed to. So we say string name as that parameter. And then this dot name equals name, semicolon. There we go. We've just created our first pair of getters and setters for the class variable name. So let's do it quickly for student ID. So we create that getter, that's going to be returning an int, and then we create the setter for it, which will be taking int in as a parameter. Perfect, now on to number of credits. Then finally the GPA. There we go. Our getters and setters have been added. Perfect, let's go back to the assignment. Okay, so this one says we need to think about the access level that each field and method should have, and try reducing the access level of at least one setter to less than public. We can do that. Let's go back here and take a look at what we have as setters. We are setting the name, student ID, the number of credits, and the GPA. Now it says when we need to reduce the access level lower than public, it's basically saying we need to set it to private. So we have to ask ourselves, which one of these class variables should we not allow people outside of this class to set? And what comes to mind is that when we're creating a student or anything that has an identifier, once we set the identifier, we don't want to change it. If we consistently keep changing the identifier or the ID of our student that we use to find it, it's going to be very hard to keep track of it. We don't want to allow people to set our student ID once it has been set. The method that we have right here in our example that allows our users of our class to set the ID is on line 38, which by the way is typed incorrectly. So this setter here should not be publicly visible to people who use our class. Therefore, I'm going to choose this one to set to private. Perfect, let's go back. So perfect, we have finished up this last task. So let's move on to number 2. Instantiate the student class using yourself as a student. Okay, so it says instantiate. I know that instantiate means to create an instance or create a new instance of a class. That class being student. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. I'm going to create a main method. And I'm going to instantiate an instance of the student using myself as the example. So I say student, I'm going to call it myself equals new student. Now, a student itself has two different constructors that we need to supply information to build the instance of the student. So let's go back to our assignment and see what it wants us to do exactly with this. For number of credits, give yourself 1 and the GPA 4.0 because I'm a Java superstar. Cool. So I need to just set the number of credits and the GPA, as well as the name and the student ID as well. So I know my name is Kyle. My student ID, I'm just going to make it 1. Number of credits, it also wanted to be 1. And the GPA is set to give us a 4.0. Now we're constructing this instance of a student class with these parameters. So now the student, myself, will have exactly what I typed in here in the constructor. So let's go back to our assignment and see what else it needs. All right, so we've instantiated the student class. Let's go on to 3. In the school package, create a class course with at least 3 fields. Okay, so this is telling us a few things. In the school package, well, we don't have a school package, so let's go ahead and go back. I'm going to create that package now. New package. I'm going to call it school. Then we need to create a class course with at least 3 different fields. Okay, so we're going to be creating classes inside of this package. So we go back here, and I see that student is outside the school package, but it sounds like we want to put everything inside of here. So what I'm going to do is right-click on student, say refactor, move class, and I'm going to move it to school. And I say refactor. This allows IntelliJ to safely move our class from one place to another. So student is now in this school package. It wanted us to create that course class. So we say new Java class, course. And it said we needed at least 3 fields. So now I need to think, what does a course have that I could create at least 3 fields out of it? Sometimes this will be easier on pen and paper. First thing I know, that the course is going to need a name. Second, how about the students inside of the course? So what students are there? So I need a list of students. And finally, if I'm taking a course, I want to know how many credits it's worth. Is it worth 3 credits towards my graduation? Is it worth 4? I'm going to put in here worth number of credits. You could also put in maybe the course's starting date, the teacher's name, something along those lines. But these are the ones I'm going to go with. So now I'm going to create the name variable. Name is going to be a string. So I'm going to say name. List of students, a list. List is my keyword here. So I'm going to create an array list, because that's our favorite list to use, of students. So I'm going to say array list, student, called students, semicolon. I'm going to import array list. And then worth number of credits. So credits is going to be a number, and it won't have a decimal in it. Courses typically aren't worth 2.5 credits. So I believe this is going to be an integer. So I'm going to say int worth number of credits. Great, so we've created 3 fields. We need to check to see if at least one of our fields should be an array list or a hash map, and we should be using the students class. We've done both of those. So let's go back to our code and see if there's anything else we need to finally do. Now, one big thing I know is that in our course, we didn't make sure that we always have our class variables as private. So I'm going to say private here. All right, coming back here in 3, we see that we don't need anything else. All it wanted were those 3 fields inside of this class. So now we can move on. In the school package, so we're going to be working in that school package again, create a teacher class with 4 fields, and then it gives us the fields to implement. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to create that teacher class inside of the school package. I'm going to copy those 4 fields because I can't really remember them into this class, so we can do that. So the first one is first name. So names are words, which we know are strings. So we're going to create a string first name variable. We also know class variables are private, so I'm going to put the keyword private in front of it. The next one is last name. It's going to be the exact same as first name. Private string last name. The next is the subject. The subject, whether it be algebra, geometry, chemistry, they're all words, so it will also be a string again. Then finally, years teaching. Years teaching can be the amount of years a teacher has been around at a university or an organization. So 1 year, 2 year, 3 year. I know 1, 2, and 3 are integers, so I'm going to create years teaching as an integer. Perfect, we've created all these fields. Add getters and setters to the class, and add access levels to each field and the methods in your class. Well, luckily, we've already added access level to each of those fields. So now we need to create the getters and setters in our method. So let's go ahead and do that. I'll first create the getter and setter for the first name, and then create the setter for the first name. Next is creating the getter and setter for the last name, and then the setter. And then so forth for subject and years teaching. And there we go, we've created all of our getters and setters. Now it says we need to go back through and see what the access level should be for each of these. Well, the getters typically should always be public, at least in this case. I want the users of my class to be able to get the first name, the last name, the subject that they're teaching, and the year's teaching. However, once you have your first name, typically the first name does not change. Of course, there's always instances where someone does, but that's a very rare case. I don't want wide public access to change my teachers' names at any time. So one thing we could do is set this public of our setter here to private. So only inside of this class we can change the teacher's first name. The last name can change, such as the teacher gets married. So I'm going to leave that one public. The subject, a teacher can easily switch subjects, so I'm going to just keep that one public as well. And then the year's teaching. I'm also going to leave this one public because this would change every year. So the only one I'm setting to private would be just the first name. That one should stay constant as much as possible. Of course, this is just my opinion. Anyone can have their own view on this and implement it how they see fit. This again was just my approach. So these are the questions we kept in mind as we were building our class. We kept our fields or class variables private, so we had to create those getters and setters to access and modify them. So that's how we approach this problem, keeping access level in mind. So at the end of this, it doesn't look like we need anything else here. So from this, it looks like we're good on this exercise. That being said, we are finished with this exercise. So thanks again for sticking it out to the end. I hope this helped.